to Coffee with Keiko, everyone. I have my coffee and I have my Keiko, the killer whale stuffy, who hangs out with us a little bit off camera. But this is a podcast where we talk with just me and my friend Paige here, just chit chat, talk about whales and stuff. She wants to know more, and I am a naturalist in the Pacific Northwest where I work on boats, and these animals are a bit my living, so I love being able to talk more about them to anyone who wants to know. So. Last time we had an interview with Adriana, who is an aspiring marine mammologist to study marine mammals. And today, Paige, let's get started. What do you want to learn about? What do you want to talk about today?
Well, I was perusing your YouTube reels, and somebody commented, and you had a reel that said, "Have you ever been snot on by a whale?"
Oh my God, he's right there. Oh my God!
And somebody commented, "That's not a whale, it's a killer whale." I'm like, okay, well, that's a whale, right? It's in the name, killer whale. Or is it an orca? What is the name of this whale? What will make me sound smart when I discuss them amongst other people? And how do whales get their names?
Yeah, let's dive into it. I love it. I think some people who are big whale nerds, they might hear that and be like, well, duh, right? But it's actually something that I get out on the boats a lot. People will be watching, say, a pod of killer whales, and people are like, oh, there are those orcas, and I'll be like, oh yeah, those are killer whales, and they're like, okay, so not orcas, and so there is a big kind of we say these two names so interchangeably that for people who it's not their life to know about whales, it's not always obvious that it is the same species that we're referring to when we say killer whale or orca. Um, so the next thing that people sometimes feel like it's not actually a whale, right? It's killer whale is the largest species of dolphin. So that is something that a lot of people do actually know. There are 38 species of oceanic dolphin, and of those 38 species, the orca is the largest species of dolphin. So they are, in fact, dolphins. Um, but dolphins, the 38 species group, those are all toothed whales. So we have essentially, I'll talk a little bit more about evolutionary, I guess, lineages within the whale family maybe next time. But essentially, we have two main splits of whales. We have the toothed whale and the baleen whale. Baleen whales are things like blue whales, humpback whales. Those are the whales that are really big. So when people think whale, that's usually what they're thinking about. The toothed whales, those include sperm whales. Those include like the belugas and the narwhals. And it also includes porpoises and beaked whales and dolphins. And so those are all distinct lineages within that group of toothed whale. So the saying goes, all dolphins are whales, but not all whales are dolphins. So
Like
it's
all
not,
squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are square.
yeah, got it. Way to make that connection. So it's not incorrect to call them a whale. And I guess that next part was, so why do they, I guess, have two different names? What's more correct? And unfortunately, they're both correct. You sound smart calling them an orca, sound smart calling them a killer whale. Not one is wrong. But sometimes people will get a little annoyed when you call them a killer whale, because it sounds mean. Because there's some people will be afraid of whales, and they're like, killer whales. That means that if I'm out on my kayak or my paddleboard, it's going to attack me. It's going to eat me. And killer whales don't actually kill people in the wild. There's never been an attack of a killer whale on a human in the wild. We are not food to them, and they're really intelligent, so they have no need to really think that we're food. There's no need for like test bites that sharks are known for. They can look at you, they can use echolocation and be like, that's not food. So there's no reason for them to attack us. So they don't kill humans. That's not why they were called killer whales. So the history of the name killer whale is actually of Spanish origin. Depending on where you are in the world, a killer whale will eat different things. Some eat fish, some eat marine mammals, some eat other whale species. So Spanish sailors saw the killer whale species killing other whales. And so they were called this Ballena assassinum. Probably did not say that correct in Spanish, but that's the Spanish term. It means whale assassin or whale killer.
Mhm.
And so in English, that just got kind of flipped around and shortened to killer whale. So it's not that it is like a killer whale, it's a dolphin, it's a whale that kills other whales. It's kind of the meaning of that common name. The name orca is part of its scientific name. So essentially, each officially described species in science has a Latin name assigned to it. Oftentimes, the Latin names either describe something about its like features, its physical features, or the scientist who named it or described it, or something about like where that animal is found. So usually the scientific name has a lot of essentially built-in meaning if you know what the Latin words stand for. And so for orca, orca is the second part of their Latin scientific name. So their full scientific name is Orcinus orca. And so some of the more familiar Latin names we might know is like humans are Homo sapien, wolves are Canis lupus. So it's kind of
Foxes are
like
vulpes vulpes.
the what up?
Foxes are vulpes vulpes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so it'd be like calling a fox a vulpes, or a human a sapien, or a wolf a lupus. So it's kind of odd to call a animal a species by the second part of its like Latin name. Like most of the time in our everyday language, what we see in the news, we use the common names, or even in scientific paper, they'll say the scientific name and then have the common name in parentheses. So it is a little odd that we actually call them orcas. And where that stems from is aquariums. It's from things like Shamu and the fact that back in the day, European settlers, we really didn't have a good relationship with these orcas. We really thought of them as wolves of the fifth sea that would kill you on sight. And I think that's probably part of that misconception of that name, killer whale. And so when humans started capturing orcas to put them in the aquarium to watch them and to swim with them and to feed them, you wanted some people to fall in love with Shamu. So you didn't want to call it a killer whale, right? Because then people would be scared of it, which is what was occurring at the time. So to essentially change the sentiment of how humans felt around killer whales, we kind of just unanimously started calling them orca instead, because orca is associated with Shamu and something that is intelligent and lovable and emotional versus a killer whale. But my favorite fun fact to tell about that scientific name, Orcinus orca, is it's not as friendly as it comes across. Like I said, Latin names have meaning, and Orcinus means belonging of Orcus, and Orcus is one of the Roman gods of the underworld. In fact, he was the Roman god that was essentially his job was to torture the evildoers in the afterlife. And so, very much like the term Hades, when you say Hades, you can refer both to the god of the underworld or the god, the underworld itself. When you say Orcus, it's the same thing. You're either referring to this Roman deity, or you're also referring to underworld or hell, in other words. And so that's Orcinus. It's belonging to essentially hell. And then Orcus or orcas, there's some arguments about what the second part of that name is supposed to actually mean. So one interpretation is that orcus in Latin means like pot-bellied jar, like large-bellied thing. So it's like maybe it was meant to be describing the shape of an orca.
Mm.
The other hypothesis is that the word didn't actually mean jar. It means like vessel. And so it forms essentially a complete descriptive sentence. So it's a vessel belonging to the underworld, right? It's like, what does a vessel, like a boat, like what does that mean? It's more like the servants, right? The workers of the underworld. And in English, we call those demons. The spirits that work for the gods of the underworld, those are demons. So essentially, the roughly translated Orcinus orca means demons from the underworld. So calling them their Latin name isn't really much nicer than calling them killer whale. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as long as we're protecting and respecting these species, they don't have an opinion too much on what we call them, you know?
Yeah. Do
Don't you
orcas,
agree, Keiko? Cool.
yes, Keiko. Do orcas call themselves anything? We know they whales make a lot of noises.
Hmm.
Do they have names?
Hmm. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
think there's been enough research on the language of whales. There is a lot of studies going on right now trying to essentially decode animal language, and they've been using AI as everything else, but they've been using AI to essentially try to decode animal language, and they've been training. What I've heard, what my understanding of this is the way they train AI with language, human language, they're essentially doing the same thing with animal language. And it's not that when you're initially training AI, you're not putting in essentially just one language. So they didn't train AI by just putting in English words. You put in all this different data, and how it works is it essentially creates correlations between different words. So, like the word dog is correlated with the word fur or collar, or leash, you know, and so that's essentially, and it's able to make those correlations for these different words across different languages to be able to understand human language from many different languages. So they're essentially doing the same thing with animals, where they're putting in vocalizations of elephants as well as with humpback whales, as well as with killer whales and other dolphin species. And so the tricky thing is with trying to understand animal language, especially from a whale, is this underwater environment. So to really kind of have an idea of what a call might mean, you have to be able to kind of see what that animal is doing and responding to. So you not only have to triangulate, have three different microphones in the water to be able to tell which animal it's coming from, but then you also need some kind of like video to see what that animal is doing. And then when they are in pods of sometimes only three to sometimes more than 75, that can be quite a challenge.
Mhm.
So, as far as I know, we don't know if they have names for each other. They probably do in some sense of the word. They definitely can recognize friends and family, and they have very complex relationships and they have complex language. So I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that they have some kind of way to call to each other and know each other's identity. Whether
Mhm.
it's in a name like how I call you Paige, it's up for debate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I've seen some things about elephants, and they're, I think, much easier to study. It's much easier to watch them, and they can, play back sounds, and specific elephants will respond. So it seems that they are closer to saying that elephants have names.
Hmm.
Mostly because they can just, do all the analysis and then just easily play back a recording of an elephant, and then one elephant will respond to that while the other elephants have ignored it. This sort of situation is what I understand of our level of elephants knowing their names,
Hmm.
having names. And there's a lot of similarities between elephants and whales. Maybe we'll discuss those in the future. That wasn't a question. You don't answer it yet. I didn't
Okay.
ask.
Okay.
Maybe there's some similarities between dolphins and whales. I don't know. Stay tuned and find out.
Okay, so I was curious about this and I looked more into it, and I found a few papers that did talk more about if whales do have names for each other. So I found these two about sperm whales and how they found that each individual has its own call it makes. And so it's not a name in the way we think of names, where I'm Kyla and she is Paige. It's more like they have this vocal identity. So when they talk, it's not like, oh, hey, Paige, come over here. It's more like, hey, it's Kyla speaking. If you know me, if you know Kyla, come here. No, I found something, I need something, I want company, whatever it is. And so instead of having names on other wills, they essentially just have names for themselves to identify who is speaking, and it also seems to have some correlation with their family line. So it'd be like, hey, I'm Kyla, speaking of the Bivens family. And that's how they start their communication so the other whales around them know who is talking. And there was another study with beluga whales that found something very similar with beluga whales, where each whale had their own like identifying call, so to speak, or way of calling. And the number of distinct individual calls, the researchers found never exceeded how many whales were in the pod or in the area at one time, which adds to that evidence that each individual does have their own identity marker. So, with that elephant analogy, they were saying with elephants, they would play a specific call, and then at that individual elephant whose name it is would come over to that call. And so in this whale situation, it'd be more like they would play a whale call, and anyone who is interested in interacting with that whale or knows that whale would come over. So it wouldn't be just one animal responding to that individual noise. It's just that that individual is only one making that noise. So pretty fascinating stuff. And now back to the normally scheduled podcast, but first a 1 minute ad about my wildlife photography and where you can see it.
Well, if I wanted to grace my home with photos of these killer whales and other whales and animals we've talked about today, could you help me out with that?
I could. I do have a website, kylasnaturalistphotos.com. If you've been on a tour with me, photos by tour, and so then you can buy prints and other gifts like mugs. I should get a mug. I should print a mug with the whale on it. And then I'd be like, I got this mug from kylasnaturalistphotos.com. Check it out. Yep. Anyway, so prints and gifts, shop by tour day, or there's also a folder called Photographers Favorites.
Now that I know, I can go on kylasnaturalistphotos.com, purchase myself some beautiful photography. I have some personal favorites. They're cool.
I meant to ask, which one did you say you wanted to buy?
Well, there's several of them. I like
okay.
flying. I don't know what it is, but it's like on the log, going to fish some stuff, some fish.
Oh, the green heron?
I love that one.
Okay.
Not that, maybe it's the small heron. I don't know. It's on the log. Yeah. That was a good one. And some of your landscapes of the Seattle skyline with a whale in it. They're great photos, people. Get on.
Thanks, Paige.
Spain obviously has coastal lands, but also the Spanish conquistadors went everywhere. Do you know if the killer whales they saw eating other whales were, off the coast of Spain, or just they ran into, is that where the whales that eat other whales are? Out in the Atlantic?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's really diving more into kind of like the global understand of different killer whale ecotypes is what we call them. The killer whale, they are found ocean-wide. Essentially, of this worldwide distribution, there's I think 12 major ecotypes that are described. So the three ones that are pretty well known in the Pacific Northwest, we have the transient ecotype, the resident ecotype, and then the offshore ecotype. The transient ecotype essentially just eats marine mammals. Occasionally a bird or two, but essentially just eat marine mammals. So seals, sea lions, porpoise, dolphin, and other whale species. So the transient ecotype in the Pacific Northwest, there's the ones that are famous that hang out off of California to hunt essentially migrating gray whales and humpback whales, where they target the calves that were born that year and primarily eat the tongue, because the tongue is one of the largest parts of that whale. It's super fatty. And if you're an orca, not only do you have to think about catching that food, you also have to eat it before it sinks, because you don't really want to dive down too deep to keep eating a food. So you do have to target the biggest, fattiest part first. So it's not them necessarily trying to be wasteful or rude. It's just like you eat the best part of the food first, and then if it sinks out of reach, it's not the end of the world. So those transient killer whales eat those marine mammals. And then the other ecotype, the resident ecotype, they eat 98% of their diet is Chinook salmon. It is one species. The other 2% is chum salmon, as well as some other fish species kind of scattered in here and there. The offshores eat a range of fishes and sharks. They're known for eating the Pacific sleeper sharks that we have off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. So those are the three main ecotypes. They don't interact with each other. They are very culturally distinct. Not only do they have their different food, they have their different like social traditions, they have different social fads, they have different language. So researchers can put in a microphone and recognize which type of orca they're listening to based off of what kind of calls they're making. And so we see that kind of dynamic of very distinct subpopulations that have their own different cultures worldwide. But the Pacific Northwest ones are the best studied ones. So there are orcas off of South Africa that are famous for eating the great white sharks down there. There are at least 4 different ecotypes off of Antarctica. Type A are the bigger ones. They also eat marine mammals. Type D is very little known about type D Antarctic orcas. They eat fish, and they're known for essentially depredating or taking fish off of fishermen lines to eat Patagonia toothfish that are found in Antarctica. And so in the Atlantic, there are 2 officially described main types of orcas that also eat marine mammals, but there's also a lot of different subpopulations. So the Mediterranean ones that have been hitting the news for destroying sailboats, those are not marine mammal eating orcas. Those eat tuna. And it's a very small, culturally distinct population that lives around the Mediterranean, coming in and out, following the routes of the tuna. So it's really hard to know what kind of orca that the Spanish may have been seeing or describing without having more information about, say, what they looked like or what calls they were making. You know, it
Where they
is,
were.
or where they were, exactly.
Very cool. So, Kyla, people, like to name things after themselves. So they discover they like to name things themselves, or like you said, what they look like, or of demons. What are some other interesting names?
Hmm. Have you ever wondered why a sperm whale is called a sperm whale?
Yes. Yes, I have. Why is a sperm whale called a sperm whale?
I feel like that's just like a go-to one because people are like, ew, sperm. So sperm whales, if you haven't seen one before, don't know what they look like, they are a type of toothed whale, but they look very different than the dolphin. They're almost like triangular shaped, with the base of the triangular being the head. So they have this massive, like, square head that then tapers down into the classic fluke that we would associate with a whale. And they're just kind of
Instant
like
whale
plain
picture.
gray, very large. And they were hunted during the whaling era. So many of the whales, they get their names or associations because of whaling era practices. So in the whaling era, they would catch these sperm whales and, cut them open to get the blubber and all the oils and stuff. And inside that massive rectangular head of theirs, they have this huge organ that they ended up calling the spermaceti organ, because when you cut into the organ, a lot of liquid white substance comes out. And the sailors, the hunters, just assumed that that was the sperm of the whale, that they kept the sperm in their head. And what was fascinating to me is they called the substance spermaceti, and the organ that held that substance spermaceti organ. So it is called the sperm whale because it was assumed that this white substance was in fact sperm
Mhm.
that was used for reproduction. It's not actually sperm.
Okay.
Crazy, crazy jump there. Yeah. Both males and females have it. And it's there is still actually debate on what the true function of this organ is, but it's most highly regarded as essentially echolocation help. So toothed whales have the ability to use echolocation, which, if you've heard of sonar, it's also called biosonar. It's very similar. Essentially, toothed whales send out high-pitched clicks. Those sound waves go out into the ocean, and because water is denser than air, sound can travel much farther. And so the sound waves travel through the ocean until they hit something. So if it hits a fish, or in the case of a sperm whale, they love giant squid. They're eating squid. So they kind of go through the water, hit a squid, and then that sound bounces off of that squid and comes back. And essentially, the organ allows the whale to pick up those soft, faint echoes and kind of acts like triangulation. They get the echoes from all the different locations, and so they're able to figure out what direction that thing is coming from. And their brain actually converts that sound essentially into a picture, into their mind. And so what the organ is thought to do is to help concentrate all those really faint sounds from those echoes so they are able to use that echolocation. That's a leading hypothesis right now. But, the whalers didn't know that. They thought it was actually sperm. And so it's funny to think that that sperm was spermaceti was so valuable because once it cooled down below body temperature, it became more of like a solidified kind of cream or wax. And so they would harvest the spermaceti from the sperm whales and use it to make cosmetic creams and lotions and candles. So back in the day when they were actually harvesting sperm whales, they thought they were making makeups out of whale sperm, which I
Interesting.
just think it's a little wild. I don't think I would be okay with that, but it's not actually their sperm, so it was
Yeah,
fine.
it
And
was fine.
they don't hunt sperm whales anymore. So
Yeah. It was
yeah,
just a head full of sound amplification jelly.
that would be more descriptive, yes.
Not a sperm. That's somewhere
Yeah,
else.
yes. And the scientific name, the Latin name for sperm whale, I always mess up exactly how to say it. It's like Physeter microcephalus. So it's essentially saying the theta means blower, and macrocephalus, anyone who studies anatomy might know this, it's big head. So they're called a big head blower.
Hmm.
That's their Latin name is big head blower. So it's a whole rabbit hole you can go down to. There's so many fun facts about the names. Like we use the word baleen whale all the time. And the scientific name for baleen whale is Misty CT. And what it comes from is Misty comes from Mystax, which means mustache. And CT means whale. So it's essentially when you're saying something is a CT or a baleen whale, it's a mustached whale
Hmm.
because
Baleen type.
scientists thought they looked like the baleen looked like a mustache.
I see that.
Right? I see it when they have their mouth like a little bit open.
Hmm.
Hmm. And then like going back to the other descriptives, the bowhead whale is an Arctic species that has massive baleen. They just kind of they're skimmers. They go to the surface and they like skim their baleen across the surface of the water to get all the little tiny fish that they're eating. And so they have huge baleen and huge mouths to be able to support catching enough food to support such a big animal. And so
Hmm.
the ridge line on their mouth, it looks like a archer's bow. So it's a bowhead whale. Or the right whale, very similar species to the bowhead whale. There's a little bit morbid. They're called the right whale because they were the right whale to kill. Once again, a lot of things go back to that whaling era. Right whales are slow and they have a huge amount of oil and fat compared to other whale species of like the same weight. And most importantly, back when whaling era really started to take off, we didn't have the same kind of machinery as we do these days. So a lot of whales were caught and killed via harpoon.
Hmm.
And right whales, when they die, they actually float. So not only were they slow, they also and had a lot of product, they also floated. So you wouldn't essentially be wasting your efforts trying to kill an animal that would then sink down into the bottom of the ocean. So right whale keep their common name, but the common name comes from being the right whale to kill. Or oh my gosh, I could just keep going. There's so many. Do I keep going? Paige, do you want to know more?
I do have a question.
Okay.
What time is the whaling era? I'm sure it's a
Well,
long time that we're whaling, with like
mhm.
peak whaling time, you know?
So there's actually so much fisheries history here. If you look at population estimate updates for whale species, the language used is still as if it was the same as a fish stock. And so like whaling has happened for millennia. The near coastal species have always been just a very important resource for coastal peoples. And in some communities and some cultures, it's a very monumentous moment where essentially like a rite of passage when a hunter makes their first whale kill, and because it provides so much blubber to have that community survive through the winter and things like that. So there is a lot of just human history with either working with whales for hunting or hunting the whales themselves. So it's more of you're more asking about the commercial whale watching, or not whale watching, whale hunting.
Yeah, commercial
Once it
whaling industry.
commercial whaling industry when it kind of started to grow and become larger than one's community, so you could broadly sell and make a lot of money. And so once it started with those slower whales, those right whales, and other whale species that were right near the coast. And then as better ships, better harpoons, faster ships became invented, whalers were able to move offshore into less coastal waters and to start hunt the bigger and the faster whales. So fin whales, blue whales, and they very well decimated many of these populations of whales, humpback whales included. They typically avoided the smaller whales, so killer whales were not very hunted very much because they're small and they're fast. Same thing with minke whales, which is like essentially a killer whale-sized baleen whale that looks like a mini blue whale or a mini fin whale. So they weren't really the target during the commercial whaling era. So the International Whaling Commission is kind of what started up to help manage whale stocks as whale stocks started to plummet from the commercial worldwide whaling industry. And eventually a moratorium came into place where it was just like, we're going to have a temporary ban on whale hunting. Just like don't hunt whales, see how their populations recover. Because at the time, much of whale biology was not known. We didn't know how long they lived. We didn't know how often they reproduced. So we didn't know how fast the stocks would actually recover. The moratorium was decided in 1982. And the US was actually ahead of the curve on that. The US during the late 60s, early 70s, kind of inspired by the author Rachel Carson. She kind of started this environmental movement across the US. And so the US actually implemented a law, the marine mammal, oh my gosh, why am I forgetting the name? I just said it yesterday. Ah, Protection Act? That's it, MMPA.
Yeah.
Why did I forget the word protection?
I don't know.
I don't
I don't know. Remember it now.
The Marine Mammal Protection Act went into place in 1972.
Mhm.
Banned people in the US or US waters to kill, take, harass marine mammals. And they started protecting whales and essentially banning whale hunting 10 years before the International Whaling Commission.
Mhm.
And when that went into place, it was supposed to be just like I said, a temporary ban until so the stocks could recover. But in that time, in that temporary ban, that 10, 20-year temporary ban, we learned a lot more about these whales. Increasing technology, photography allowed us to get more accurate population estimates, learn more about how fast they reproduce, which is not actually very fast, and also allow the world via the internet to really fall in love with these species. You know, not only did we have dolphins such as bottlenose dolphins, orcas, pilot whales in captivity, but also there's that show Free Willy.
Circles? He's really doing it. Yeah, look at you.
That came out in the 90s that really spurred people to want to go out and see these whales in the wild. And so that's what actually really kind of kickstarted that whale watching industry of wanting to go and see them alive and in the wild. And so once the public formed such a strong emotional connection to these animals, that's where we started to get shows like Sea Shepherd, where to go out and essentially stop whaling. So, because people don't want to see these large, smart, intelligent creatures hunted anymore. There is still whale hunting that occurs to date that is small scale commercial for individual countries. And most of what they target though are minke whales, which are those small fin whale looking like whales that I had mentioned before as not being desirable during the main part of the commercial whaling era. And so it's something that should be kept track of for population purposes to make sure it's responsible. But as far as like the risk to the species themselves, minke whales aren't at risk of being overhunted at its current levels. It always maintained a pretty good population level since it wasn't really targeted, and they have a very fast um, reproductive rate. They are mature around the age of 6 to 8, and then they'll have like a calf every single year. So it's they're not too much of a concern. More of the concern with any whale hunting right now is the less common species. So there are sei whale and Beard's whale that look very common, like similar to the minke whale, but they're bigger, and the Beard's whale is endangered. And so
Mm.
that's kind of more the concern is the lack of discrepancy between the different unique species.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Kind of like by catching the
Yeah.
wrong whale.
Yeah, or I mean, it's kind of links actually back into the minke whale name. It's sometimes hard to know what species you're dealing with when they do look similar, especially when you're seeing such a small part of their back when they actually break the surface.
Mhm.
Um, so the minke whale gets its name. Supposedly, the lore goes from a Norwegian settler named Minke or Menke. Essentially, Menke was a whale spotter for a Norwegian whaling outfit, and instead of yelling whale for the blue whale that they actually wanted to hunt, he kept yelling it for the much, much smaller minke whale. And so it was like so hysterical and embarrassing. They started calling this little whale Minke's whale as a way to make fun of him. And
Oh.
supposedly that's where it gets its name, and it just stuck. Kind of a name of shame.
Or
And it's,
faux pas naming
yeah,
an entire species. It's
yep.
not the worst.
Imagine just being at work one day and making a mistake that's pretty reasonable, and just now the entire world for the rest of history knows your name for that one mistake.
Yep. At least most people don't know it's from a mistake.
That's true.
They assume it's because he made some sort of contribution, not
That's true.
necessarily that the contribution was a mistake.
I mean, it's true. It's like so many of our whale names, Beard's whale, Doll's porpoise, like it's because it's the scientists who studied them or described them. It's supposed to be an honorary thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Minke whale's like the only one where it's like, haha.
Yep. I think he's just screwing up at work.
Mhm.
Be careful.
Don't be a minky.
Don't be a minky.
Don't be a dolls.
Be a doll. Well, I'm now much more educated on whale names and a bit of the history. I grew up watching Whale Wars. I think maybe we're going to discuss things like that more in the future, possibly. But world
That's
is
an
a
idea.
vampire. Da-na-na-na-na-na. Set to radiate. Musical talents from the hours watching Whale Wars.
Well, shall I wrap up here?
Yep.
Thank you for watching Coffee with Keiko with myself, Keiko, my coffee, and my friend Paige who wants to know and discuss everything whales with me. You can follow, subscribe for more future episodes, and in the description, there will be links to my website and other socials that you can follow and check out. Feel free to leave a comment if you want us to, if you have questions that you want answered. We can make sure to prioritize those conversations. And if you want more content, there is a whole like behind the scenes membership option. I'll also have that link to buy me a coffee, Kyla's Naturalist Photos. Then you can sign up for memberships, and then you get more of these episodes. And so then you can hear everything we talk about before, after, and cut out in between. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.